switch mics. Open with me if you will. There we go. John chapter 15. Part of it was read for us this morning, so we'll dive in and we'll reread some of it as it becomes important and relevant to our place in the story. We have a few pictures we're going to be throwing up. These are pictures of roses, of flowers, of vines. Robert, at your leisure, you can hit the advance button. They're not tied in any particular way to the sermon. They're not going to be a specific illustration. But it's something for you to look at as we look at the words of Jesus and how these two things relate. So, enjoy the roses. Which I'll just say on the side as we're getting started. If you ever bring me flowers, or you got flowers and you want me to see them and smell them, and you say, smell these, don't they smell great? I will tell you yes, but I'm lying, okay? Because I cannot smell them. My wife brings me roses like, smell this, aren't those the most beautiful smelling roses? Yeah, smell like dirt to me. So, it is nothing personal. I will compliment you on how great your flowers are. They're the best I've ever seen. But just so we know, I can't smell them. They don't smell to me. But roses, I think, give us a great metaphor for what Jesus is talking about. Now, I'm no gardener. I grow weeds very, very successfully. But fruit-bearing, vegetable-bearing plants, I'm fairly terrible at. It's a bit shameful to admit that because I grew up on a farm and my dad had an acre of garden that I was responsible for weeding every summer. But I'm not very good at it. I try. We've carved up a little plot in our backyard to try and grow some stuff. And I think we didn't do it this last summer, but 2 years ago, I think I grew like 1.5 cucumbers. So you can tell I'm not very adept at growing a garden. I would love to, but that quality, that characteristic of what it takes to produce a good garden eludes me. And yet I look at roses, and I think, now there's an interesting plant, and it's something that I think we can learn from about what it means to be a person of faith. You see, we prune roses, I found out. I didn't know this. Because if you just sort of let roses grow wildly, the vines begin to close in on themselves. And life literally gets choked out. So if you have a rose bush and you don't prune it, eventually what's going to happen is you're going to have a bunch of roses that don't look very good. Because it can't get enough light to produce good-looking roses. So you prune because you would rather have fewer really good-looking roses than a whole bunch of sort of terrible, half-dead-looking ones. So it's important to keep it trimmed because pruning actually helps promote life. It looks better, it gives it better vitality. So we have these roses that are terribly finicky at growing. They need the right soil, they need the right conditions, they need the right amount of sunlight. They need the right amount of everything, and then they need a loving hand to come in and help them finish the journey. Well, Jesus in John chapter 15 begins to paint a similar metaphor for what a life with Him looks like, what a life with God, what a life shaped by the moving of the Holy Spirit needs to look like. Because we tend to think, at least on the surface, when we share with people, hey, Jesus came to bring the good life. And in truth, He did. But we often don't paint a complete picture because the good life for a rose can't happen without pruning. And Jesus says the same sort of thing about life as a follower of Him. The good life with God can't happen without pruning. So when you share, Jesus came to bring me the good life, and I can tell you what I know now is much better than the life I was living. Well, that's true, but what we often leave out is, and there were some hard times to get to where I'm at now. It hurts. Pruning hurts us. Look, I would much rather go and do this with my Friday night, but I know that this is what Jesus is calling me to, and we undergo this pruning process so that we can have a better life, we can experience growth. So we have roses that sort of teach us on a visual level. Life really only happens at its fullest when we undergo a pruning. And Jesus, John chapter 15, gives us the same sort of idea. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. He wants you to have good, abundant fruit. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. So there, in a nutshell, is Jesus saying, your job as a follower of him is to produce fruit. To live, to enjoy, to experience the good life, but that good life cannot be devoid from the hardships and the pruning that we undergo. And now we sort of get stuck in this great divide of, so what does this look like? What do we do? And there are those that would advocate for the sole purpose of Christianity, the sole purpose of you and your life with Jesus is to abide. We need to abide in Jesus. We need to abide. All we have to do is make sure we abide in Jesus, and then we're doing what he calls us to. And so somehow we mistakenly associate that with a bunch of things we need to do. So we go to Bible study, we attend church regularly, we might even give a bit of money, we serve our neighbor if it's not too inconvenient. We find ways that we think quantify what abiding means. Look, I've done all of the right things. I'm abiding, aren't I good? But if we're honest, I think there are times when, having done all of those things, having gone to bed at night, being able to check off, yep, I went to church today, yep, I read my Bible, yep, I haven't spent a bit of time in prayer. We live and we feel like we're living a life that's largely ineffective and fruitless. And if we're honest, a little bit boring. Like, is this all that God called me to? When I signed up to follow him, was it really just a bunch of things that I need to check off? Well, if we approach Christianity, if we approach a life with God from that standpoint, I think we're missing the point. Because the point that Jesus gives us is not the ability to abide. It's the ability in our abiding to produce fruit. So picture yourself a gardener. Much better one than me, because we've already seen that I'm a terrible one. So picture in your garden, in your space, there's a tree in front of you. You are a master gardener, you know what this tree needs. And on this tree, it is full of beautiful looking branches and leaves. The leaves are healthy, they're a nice shade of green. There's even good looking, healthy fruit on this tree. It is covered from head to toe. It is a good looking tree in your garden. There are signs of life around it. Not only will you be able to gain something from it, but the wildlife and the soil and everything gains from having this tree. This is the best tree that you know of. And on this tree there is one stick, one branch that doesn't have anything on it. It's a terrible looking stick. In the midst of a tree full of life and vitality and goodness, there's one branch that's just sort of sticking there like an eyesore. Now you as the master gardener, how many of you would say, wow, that stick does such a great job of abiding, I think I'll just leave it. It becomes a detractor to the rest of the tree. You know, this whole tree is beautiful and resplendent with fruit, except that one stick, but man, that stick sure abides well. I'll leave it. Now, if you're really a good gardener, if you really pay attention to the needs of the tree, you're going to understand that that stick actually becomes a detriment. That we miss something by not pruning the tree. The best thing we can do for that tree to make it even more productive and more fruitful is to go in and cut off that dead branch. I think there are a lot of us in the Christian world give ourselves a false set of assurance when it comes to our life with God. We praise ourselves for our ability to abide, but not our ability to produce fruit. And yet that's what Jesus seems to make most abundantly clear. Any part of you that's not producing fruit, that's not making better decisions and disciples and doing a good job at following him, he's going to prune out of our lives. So we're sort of stuck in this no man's land of, well, I'm abiding, but I'm not producing fruit. And Jesus says, I don't care how well you abide if it's void of fruit in your life. So we're not much better than that one ugly stick sometimes. So what does that life with Jesus look like? But as we journey towards Lent, as we make this conscious decision for the next several weeks to say we are following Jesus to the cross, what does it look like for me to mold myself to him? Because Jesus said, anybody who wants to be my disciple, and then throughout the gospel stories, he gives several requirements for what it means to be his disciple. Anybody who wants to follow me must daily take up their cross. Anybody who wants to follow me must be willing to deny themselves. Anybody who wants to be my disciple must take care of the poor. And he gives us at least 10 explicit characteristics of what a life with him looks like. To be my disciple, you must fill in the blank. And then here in John 15, as Jesus is getting ready to go to the cross, he is teaching his disciples one last time, look, I am leaving you soon. Remember, we've been journeying through John all of 2014 so far. And repeatedly, early in the Gospels, he says, look, it's not my time. It's not my time to do what God really brought me here for. These miracles, they're all a precursor to what God really has in mind. This miracle, this sign, we looked at all 7 in the Gospel of John, somehow points forward to what Jesus will do at the cross. And repeatedly, Jesus has said, look, now is not my time. Except now, he's beginning to make that transition. I am with you only a short while longer. My time has come. My time is coming. I will be fully glorified. So here, in the middle of John 15, having celebrated the Last Supper, after giving us, we looked at last week, the symbols of the Christian faith, the basin and the towel, what does service look like? He says, abiding in me is important. But abiding and fruit production is what I'm looking for. So Jesus, in John chapter 15, gives us a life with fruit and ties it to discipleship. Ties it to what does it look like to mold our lives with his. So what does being a disciple look like? And I got this example from somebody else, so I take no credit for this. But the fruit of a mango produces what? Juice? No? Seeds? Close? I've never seen a mango produce a mango. It produces a mango tree, doesn't it? That if you plant a mango in the ground, what pops up is not another mango. It pops up a mango tree. So the life in discipleship, a life with Jesus, the fruit that God is looking for us to produce is more disciples. More people that follow him. So all of a sudden the question for us becomes, abiding is important so long as it provides fruit. And the fruit of a life with God is our ability and our capacity to call more people to follow him. So it's not, how many Bible studies have you been to? How many times did you go to church this week? How much money did you give? How nice were you? How clean is your home? How well groomed are your pets? How polite are your children? Because we sometimes convince ourselves, look, I've got it all together. Look at all of this. How well it's going. And yet Jesus says, the one requirement I ask of you on the eve of my death is that you call more people to follow me. The measurement of fruit in our lives is how many people we have created that are following Jesus. So now all of a sudden when we're undergoing a pruning process, What we need to realize is we're being pruned because there's an area and an aspect in our life that's keeping somebody from coming to faith in Jesus. So when you're laying awake at night and saying, man, this life sure hurts. God, what are you doing here? Think about what's hurting, what's being ineffective, what's being trapped inside of us, what we're missing. Because there's something inside of us that's keeping somebody from coming to faith in Jesus. We undergo pruning for the sake of others to experience the fruit of the goodness of Jesus. So the fruit of a life with God, according to Jesus, is our own ability and our own capacity to make new followers of Him. Abiding is important. Jesus says, apart from me, you can't do that. So we don't need to throw out this idea of it's important for me to abide with God. It's good to study the Bible. It's good to go to church. It's good to experience life and faith with brothers and sisters that can encourage us. But the point is not to be able to check those things off. The point is that you can leave here being better equipped to produce fruit that is new followers. That if the church is living and operating and experiencing life together as it says we believe in the Bible, there should be new people wanting to come in and experience that. There should be something about the modeling of our lives and the way we live that becomes attractive to people and say, tell me more. You know, I hear you talk about this church. I hear you talk about the Bible. I hear you say what it means to follow Jesus. And I don't get it. I don't understand it. Please tell me more. Fruit production for the life of the Christian is that capacity to bring in new followers. So Jesus says, abide. Be a part of the vine. Be connected to me. But don't think that being connected to me is the end result. Because you end up being nothing more than that ugly stick on the tree. Undergo the pruning process that you can produce fruit. That on the eve of my death, on the thing that I will do for you that you just can't do yourself, what my death and my resurrection is going to accomplish, the whole point of that, the whole point of these miracles, the whole point of my life and my existence and my time here on earth, Jesus says, the whole point of this is so that you can be connected to God, but so that you can connect other people as well. I think that needs to become our measurement of faith and success as individuals and as a church. How is our church, how are we when we're gathered and when we're scattered, when we celebrate together on Sunday morning and when we're meeting in homes on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, or when we're at lunch with our coworkers on Friday? How much fruit does Garden Park produce? Because that's the measurement that Jesus is going to use. He's going to write. Later, John would pen the book of Revelation. He would point out flaws and characteristics in churches. Look, you're doing this well, but you've lost your first love. But there are churches that lost that ability to abide. And he would critique other churches and say, look, you're doing a really good job of abiding, but you're not producing fruit. Your church has been in existence for so long, and yet there's no one wanting to come into relationship with me. You're going to be pruned if you don't change soon. So let's not make any excuses. Let's not pretend to sugarcoat it. Pruning hurts. It's never fun. I don't think any of us would voluntarily say, yeah, Jesus, go ahead and prune away some of the things in my life that are keeping me from you. But it's always necessary. If we look again at the rose, pruning promotes health, it promotes vitality, it promotes life. It brings about a better quality, not only rose bush, but fruit, the roses. The things that smell nice, the thing that make Valentine's Day special, the thing that allow us to communicate how much we love someone around us, had to undergo a pruning process. Had to undergo this pain and this refinement. The same is true in our own lives. Our ability, our capacity, our desire to make fruit is tied by how much we're willing to surrender everything to Jesus. As individuals, as a church. You cannot continue to harbor something. You cannot continue to hoard it. Jesus says, you have to be willing to lay down everything to follow me. And there are those places, those areas in our own lives that we're not quite willing to give up yet. And so we need to be pruned. But it's so that we might experience the good life that Jesus promised us. That our church needs to produce fruit, needs to be able to call new people to follow Him. And if we're not doing that, or if we're doing it but we think we can do it better, then we need to be pruned. We need to be shown ways in which we can not only abide more faithfully, but be pruned from the things that get in the way. Growing up, I was part of a church that began to make the transition from traditional to contemporary music. And it's probably affected every church in America, is my guess. And at some point, churches have had to decide, look, how are we going to worship? And it often gets in the way. And my home church, I think they did it as faithfully and as authentically as they can. But, they sort of underwent multiple changes. I was part of a church growing up that even on special services like Christmas Eve, we still sang in German. So I was there when we made that transition from German to English, at least on the Christmas Eve service. The Sunday time had been in English for a while, but there were portions still on Sunday night that gathered in German. And yet we realized that becomes a detriment to come to our church because the vast majority of people around us don't speak German. So we had to make that transition, and that was an easier transition for some than others. And then on Sunday morning, the gathered time becomes, well, do we sing hymns or do we sing contemporary music? Well, we need to remodel the sanctuary. Do we go with the blue carpet or the red carpet? And as strange as it seems, those sorts of questions often divide the church. And then I think we can also see those as opportunities for pruning. You see, the issue becomes we become divided within the church when we focus on ourselves. Well, I want the red carpet. Well, I want the blue carpet. And all of a sudden, we've got two factions. Unless you think it's a joke, I know of a church that actually split over the color of the carpet and whether to have pews or chairs. Because we become inward focused. This is what I want. And I think in this model of John 15, that becomes when our focus becomes just on the abiding. We become divided and not on the fruit production. Then if we say, look, I don't care if the carpet is red or blue, as long as it helps people come to Jesus, we're going to get a vastly different outlook on the way our church operates. I don't care whether we sing hymns or contemporary music, as long as people are coming to Jesus. I don't care if we have 1 services or 8, as long as people are coming to faith. That abiding often tends to become inward focused. That all I have to do is abide. And if I abide and you abide and you abide and you can abide, we're being faithful. Well, yes, but the end result is not always abiding, it's fruit production. And that has to look outward, because fruit is about blessing other people. The apple tree doesn't continue to produce apples so it can brag about how many apples it produced. It does it so it can feed and serve and help the environment around it. That birds and squirrels benefit from a good, healthy apple tree. Fruit is about giving to others. So let's close with the idea of fruit production as our metaphor for a faithful life with God. How faithful are you? And how faithful is our church? Abiding is important. And I want you to hear that. You cannot produce fruit without abiding. But you never abide faithfully without producing fruit. And that's where we often fall short. Fruit production for the life of the Christian is about making new followers for Jesus. It's about being able to look back at our life and say, these are the people that I chose to invest in that are now following Jesus because of my investment in them. This is the new generation. This is the next generation of people that have a life and a faith with God. Because, yes, I was abiding in Christ. But I also underwent some pruning that helped me see better what it meant to give and love and serve. So may we be individuals and a church found faithful in the production of fruit, producing new people to follow Him. Let's pray.